congenital hypothyroidism. So my objectives will be of the presentation will be I will brief you about the incidence, etiopathogenesis, the clinical presentation, the screening methods which we have, and how to confirm a diagnosis of hypothyroidism, management of hypothyroidism in the neonates, and the follow-up, and some special situations, especially the prematurity, which we see in the common day-to-day practice. So I try to make it as simple as possible so that all pediatricians and neonatologists can understand and apply in their day-to-day practice. It is the commonest cause of preventable mental retardation. So when you see all the causes of mental retardation which can be prevented, like by initiating early treatment, so this stands amongst the first. Before the introduction of routine screening methods, the incidence was around 1 in 2500 to 1 in 3000. But as we see, I have shown some data also. Once the screening methods were introduced, the incidence is quite much higher than this. This is the Indian data, studies published in the last decade. So several studies they have used various methods. Some studies have used cord blood TSH, Matai et al. From Vellore, and others have used postnatal filter paper, that is on day 3 to day 5. And in all these studies, the incidence is between 1 in 1000 to 1 in 1300. So it is almost double what we have thought previously, and this is especially because of introduction of screening methods. So this indicates that if we were not screening, we would miss more than 50% of the cases. So that is the importance of screening for congenital hypothyroidism, which I will go in detail in the future slides. So the studies from the ICMR multicentric study, Lucknow multicentric study, and one study from Bangalore, all are showing a similar incidence. A brief about the thyroid hormone synthesis. So thyroid hormones are basically synthesized from iodine and thyroglobulin. Just I will brief about the steps of the thyroid hormone synthesis, because that will help us understand more about the etiologies, especially the dishormonogenesis. The iodine is absorbed into the thyroid follicular cells through the endothelium by the sodium iodide symporter. Then the iodine is transported across the follicular cell, and through the transporter called pendrin, it enters the thyroid. Once it is inside the thyroid gland, the first step is organification of iodine, where it becomes a active form, the biologically active form, periodate. This periodate then will be combined with the thyroglobulin, which is again synthesized in the thyroid follicular cell, and this will result in the precursor of the thyroid hormone. Following this, there will be phenolic coupling, which results in active forms, that is T4 and T3, and then this is transported into the follicular cell by endocytosis, and there will be proteolysis following this. Then the active forms of T4 and T3 are formed in the follicular cell. These are again transported into the blood by the MCT8 transporter. So defects in various steps can result in dishormonogenesis. Okay. So once we come to the etiology, dysgenesis is by far the commonest cause of congenital hypothyroidism, the permanent primary congenital hypothyroidism, which accounts for 85% of the cases. Dishormonogenesis accounts for 15%. Among the dysgenesis, the commonest seen in our country is ectopic gland, followed by hypoplasia, hemiagenesis, and aplasia. And dishormonogenesis, the commonest cause of dishormonogenesis is thyroperoxidase deficiency, followed by Jewell oxidase, Pendred syndrome, thyroglobulin deficiency, and iodide transporter defect. All these are autosomal recessive inherited disorders. Other causes, uncommon causes are TSH resistance, which can be either classic or non-classic form, and central hypothyroidism because of defects in hypothalamus or the pituitary. There are some rare things like defects in thyroid hormone transport, metabolism, and action, which we will not be discussing. The other forms of hypothyroidism which we see are transient hypothyroidism, which is not actually a primary permanent hypothyroidism. This is a transient form picked up on neonatal screening, and usually it resolves by 3 years of age. And we also hear frequently about transient hypothyroxemia of prematurity and sick euthyroid syndrome. I will discuss in detail about all these entities later. So how do these thyroid hormones act? So thyroid hormones have a crucial role in all phases of development. May it be intrauterine development, especially in the brain development, and also the postnatal growth and development. They also have significant role in metabolism because they form a part of the counter-regulatory hormone system, and there is also significant crosstalk with other receptors and pathways. So they're practically involved in each and every activity which is going on inside our body. That is why they are very important, especially in the in utero life till 18 to 20 weeks. There is no fetal good amount of thyroid hormone produced by the fetus. So the fetus is excessively dependent on the maternal hormones. So clinical manifestations, it is important to know that most often they are asymptomatic, especially in the early infancy, in the first 3 months of life. But sometimes we can find other symptoms, like they can be post maturity, they can be, the babies can be large for gestational age. We see prolonged jaundice, they can have abnormal hoarse cry or lethargy. Sometimes we see feeding difficulties, that the child is dull, not feeding well. There can be constipation. And some clinical signs which are noted are macroglossia, cold or motile skin, hypothermia, and there can be some edema, especially in the the extremities. Wide fontanelle is one of the features. There can be widely open sutures. Open posterior fontanelle is shown to have high sensitivity for diagnosing congenital hypothyroidism. There can be flat nasal bridge. There can be visceroptosis, which will result in protuberant abdomen and umbilical hernias or the inguinal hernias also. We also note hypotonia and diminished reflexes. But it is important to note that substantial proportion of neonates will not have any of these symptoms. They can be just like any other normal child. Only in the later age we may pick up the hypothyroidism. So we will discuss about the screening of congenital hypothyroidism. Why should we screen for CH? So these are the famous Wilson and Jungner's principles of screening, published way back in 1968. And almost all the screening programs in the world are based on this. So for a condition to be eligible for screening, it should satisfy the following conditions. It should be an important health problem, the natural history is well known, and there should be a recognizable latent or early symptomatic stage where we identify disease and we start treatment so that it will alter the outcomes. There should be a suitable test. The test should be acceptable to the population. There should be a policy to treat how the diagnosed patients, and the treatment should also be acceptable to the patients. Facilities and for diagnosis and treatment should be widely available. Cost of case should be economically viable, and it should be a continuous process. This case finding. So if you apply the same thing to congenital hypothyroidism, it satisfies each and every component of this. So this is what Dr. Bradford Terrell, he is a famous person who is a founder of International Newborn Screening Institute and also recipient of many awards. So what he says is, given the large number of births in India per year and the costs involved, if only one disorder is to be screened, it should be congenital hypothyroidism. So this should be the bare minimum screening we do in each and every birthing unit, screening for congenital hypothyroidism. So then the point comes, which test we should use. So for any screening program, the test used should have ideally high sensitivity and high specificity. But there will be rarely such tests which have very high sensitivity and specificity. But at least we should not miss any cases of the disease we are targeting. In this case, congenital hypothyroidism. That means there should not be any false negatives. We can accept some amount of false positives, but that should not be very high. But there should not be any false negatives. So we have T4 and TSH based approaches which are available throughout the world. And just a comparison of TSH versus T4 based approaches. Primary TSH approach, in both the approaches, the diagnostic test will be doing both the tests, the T4 and TSH. So it depends on which test we do first. The primary TSH approach, the sensitivity is very good for primary congenital hypothyroidism, including the compensated forms, which are often missed on primary T4 screening with backup TSH. And T4 screening is sensitive for primary and secondary congenital hypothyroidism. That is the hypothalamic and pituitary causes, but these are very rare. They account for less than 1 to 2% of all the cases of congenital hypothyroidism. And we can see false positive screen in both the conditions and also false negative screen in both the conditions. For primary TSH based approach, a false positive means an falsely elevated TSH when there is no actual hypothyroidism. So this can result because of neonatal surge of TSH. I will discuss about this neonatal surge of TSH. Because of this, even if the child is not hypothyroid, the TSH may be falsely elevated. And also in some transient forms of congenital hypothyroidism, we can see, but they are not actually taken as false positives because we start treating all the transient forms of CH. So only thing which can result in false positivity is neonatal surge. And coming to the primary T4 approach, false positive screen can be seen in thyroid binding globulin deficiency, which I will discuss later. In prematurity, what we call hypothyroxanemia of prematurity, transient hypothyroxanemia, and also in sick neonates, also called sick euthyroid syndrome. So in all these situations, the child is not actually hypothyroid, but falsely the T4 or free T4 or both are low. Then coming to false negative screen, that is, the child is hypothyroid, but there is no abnormality on the screening test. This can occur in both the situations. Like TSH can be falsely normal despite presence of hypothyroidism when it is central hypothyroidism, and it is also seen in delayed rise of TSH. Delayed rise of TSH again is seen in premature babies. So this will be discussed later. And T4 can also be falsely normal. This is more common actually. Compensated forms of primary CH and transient forms of CH. They both will be missed on primary T4 based approach. And when there is iodine deficiency also, T4 may be falsely normal. The initial manifestation will be elevation of TSH only. And when we compare the recall rates, primary TSH recall rates means when we screen like 100 neonates, how many neonates have to be recalled? How many neonates will have positive screening test? That's what it means. Suppose the population is 10,000. So if you see primary TSH 0.03 to 0.8%, like 3 to 18 neonates will be recalled when it is primary TSH. But when it is primary T4, it is much higher. It's 0.1 to 1.1%. So if you take a population of 10,000, you will be calling around 100 to 1100 babies. So it is, 10 to 110 babies. It is higher, much higher. So based upon all these things, primary TSH is more sensitive and it is also more cost effective compared to primary T4 based approach. So most countries in United States, Europe, Asia, or Australia, they use primary TSH based approach. Some states in US and other countries like Israel and Netherlands, they use primary T4 based approach with backup TSH. So this is the neonatal surge of TSH and T4. So the dotted lines indicates the surge in preterm babies and the solid lines in term babies. Coming to the TSH surge in it begins at 30 minutes. So 30 minutes of life, and it peaks on the first 6 hours of life. The peak is different. In term babies, the peak is much higher, up to 60 to 70 micro international units per milliliter compared to preterm units. It is much lower. It is around 40 to 50. So the T4 levels, the T4 surge is completely dependent on the TSH surge. Because TSH surges, this is followed by a surge in release of T4. Again, it is abbreviated in premature neonates. So both these have very important implications. That's why I'm spending time on this slide, which we'll come to know later. So the T4 surge is higher in term babies and it is abbreviated in preterm babies. Similarly, TSH surge. And the time of normalization of TSH surge is almost similar. And the time to trough of T4 surge is also similar. So when should we screen? So obviously it should be either before or after the surge. So before the surge, it should be before 30 minutes of age. Ideal sample will be a cord sample. After the surge, it will be after 48 hours in vaginal delivery or 72 hours after cesarean section.
Lost your screen.
Oh, okay. You can see, sir?
Now we are able to see.
Okay. So either it should be before the surge or after the surge. The time to normalization, like below 20 milli international units per liter, which we use as a commonly used cutoff. After vaginal delivery, it usually happens after 48 hours, but in cesarean section, it may be as long as 72 hours. So ideally, it has to be after this time point. But if we are doing between 24 to 48 hours of age, because of maybe we have an early discharge policy, so we can use R specific nomogram between this, but usually a cutoff of 35 is recommended when we screen at this time point. But never ever we should screen before 24 hours of age, because the recall rate will be very, very high. So I will just discuss the differences between cord TSH and postnatal TSH based screening, the advantages and disadvantages. In cord TSH based screening, the sample will be taken either from the umbilical vein or artery. The sample collection is painless, and large amount of sample can be taken. In postnatal TSH test, it can be either, like we can use a filter paper or we can take a venous sample from venipuncture. Both have false negatives in prematurity, and cord TSH has an important limitation because in presence of perinatal depression, it may not be very useful. The false positive rates are very high. So when there is perinatal depression, we may avoid taking a cord sample, or even if we take, it has to be repeated after 2 to 3 days. So in postnatal TSH based, in some babies, we have discussed is 48 to 72 hours, but it is not true for all the babies. In some babies, the surge can last up to 96 hours. So that is the main reason behind the increased recall rate in the TSH based approaches. But when we compare cord TSH and postnatal TSH, actually the recall is much higher in cord TSH. Most of the studies show that it is 4 to 6%. Only one study has shown 0.04%, but rest all studies have shown it to be around 5%. In postnatal TSH, it is around 0.5 to 1%. So on an average, you will be calling around 5 times more babies when you are using cord TSH based screening for the diagnostic test. Then screening compliance, it is very easy to ensure with cord TSH based testing because it is in your hands. And postnatal TSH, it is mainly dependent on the discharge policy and the follow-up rates. So some units who practice delayed discharge, like around 72 hours, it may be still possible to achieve a very good compliance. But follow-up and maintaining a very good compliance, I'm not very sure whether it is possible or not. And one problem with cord TSH based screening is we cannot screen for other metabolic disorders, which is possible, and which is the main advantage of postnatal TSH based screening. And the training of personnel may be more difficult. Like when a unit wants to adopt this policy, you would need trained personnel throughout the clock when you are using cord TSH based thing. But when it is a postnatal thing, like you can restrict to some 4 to 6 hours in a day, and only one person can be trained who can look after every day. So it is more resource intensive when we use cord TSH based screening. So these are the merits and demerits of both the approaches. However, several units use either of the approaches. Either of them can be used. Then the differences between venous sample and filter paper sample.
RP, can you previous slide?
Yeah, please.
Can you please through the slide again because we missed your screen again.
Oh, sorry. So in cord TSH based screening, it is very easy to ensure compliance rates of around 100%. But in postnatal TSH based, it is mainly dependent on the discharge policy. Suppose we are having a policy of late discharge by around 48 to 72 hours. It is still possible to screen all the babies. But if we have early discharge, we are discharging most of the babies by 24 hours, then it becomes a challenge doing a postnatal TSH based approach. And when usually we screen for other metabolic disorders also, expanded newborn screening, that is possible with CORD TSH based approach. Both can be clubbed together. Postnatal TSH based. But with CORD TSH based approach, that is not possible. And when a unit wants to adopt this TSH based, whether they have to go for the CORD or postnatal one, the CORD one, it is slightly resource intensive because we need round the clock presence of personnel who have to be trained. While in a postnatal TSH based one person can be trained who can be used in some fixed time point of the day to collect the samples. So these things come into play when we are deciding which one has to be followed in our unit. So the differences between a venous sample and a filter paper sample. Venous sample usually is large volume, so it can be processed in all the laboratories, and it is usually ELISA or chemiluminescence based methods. And storage has to be appropriate in a refrigerator, and it has to be transported to lab within a day. But when we are using a filter paper, that is, we are screening for other metabolic disorders, and we want to use filter paper, it can be processed only in specialized labs. So we should have a good laboratory backup or collaboration with another laboratory. And usually immunofluorescence or colorimetric testing is used. After collecting the sample, it has to be air dried. Uh, just like any other metabolic disorder screen, it has to be air dried for 3 to 4 hours. After that, it has to be stored in the room temperature. Uh, Maximum for a day. In a summer months, it is better to refrigerate it. Then it has to be transported to the laboratory. Then the next question comes once we do the screen and we get the results. Which all neonates we have to call them back for diagnostic testing. So this is what we define as the threshold for the congenital hypothyroidism screening. So most guidelines recommend a cutoff of 20 milli international units per liter for both cord and postnatal. Okay. So if it is between 20 to 40, that is mild elevation, we can call them between 7 to 10 days of age. But if it is more than, it may indicate underlying severe hypothyroidism. There should be immediate recall. Okay. So once they come back, the diagnostic test should be a venous sample, which includes both thyroid stimulating hormone and T4 or free T4. So there is some division across guidelines in this. Some guidelines tell we can repeat a screen again, do just TSH. But others suggest that already we are taking a sample. Once we are taking the sample, better to take both the hormones like TSH and T4 or free T4. Whenever available, free T4 is preferred to T4. I will tell the reason behind this, why it is so. But whenever it is available in your setup, choose free T4 over T4. Now, how to interpret the diagnostic test? So, a high TSH and a low T4. It is the classic permanent primary congenital hypothyroidism. But this can also be seen in
this slide, I think.
Again, sir.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, we got it.
So, a high TSH and low T4 is diagnostic of primary congenital hypothyroidism. But it can be either permanent or transient. It is not possible to differentiate at this time point. A high TSH with normal T4 can be seen in compensated primary congenital hypothyroidism, and transient hypothyroidism, endemic iodine deficiency, and inactivating mutations of TSH receptors. If you remember, all these were reasons for false negative T4 based approach. So all these would be potentially missed if you use T4 based approach. And a normal TSH and low T4. So the T4 is low, again you have to go for free T4, because T4 can be low, but free T4 can be normal in thyroid binding globulin deficiency. This is a benign condition which only has a laboratory abnormality, but it doesn't have clinical manifestations. That is the importance of doing a free T4. If both T4 and free T4 is low, it It indicates actual deficiency of T4. It is seen in central hypothyroidism, sick neonate, and in prematurity. In some situations, we see delayed rise of TSH and a normal T4. So this is commonly seen in, again, preterm babies and sick newborns with permanent congenital hypothyroidism. However, this can also be seen in endemic iodine deficiency. So when should the treatment be started? If the screen TSH is very high, that is more than 80, there is no point waiting.
Screen, I
You
think,
just
with this slide.
now, sir.
Screen is loading, I think. Just a minute. Can you share again?
You can see now, sir.
Yeah, when to start treatment slide is there, I think.
Yeah, you got that slide.
Yeah, I got the slide. When to start treatment, right?
Yeah. So if the TSH is more than 80, so there is no point waiting for the value of the confirmatory sample. Just send the confirmatory sample and start treatment then and there. Unless you are going to get the report in like few hours, maybe in couple of hours, you may wait. But in all other scenarios, just start the treatment. Because in such scenarios, delaying treatment even by a day can be having deleterious consequences. In general, if you just approach the results of the diagnostic test, we start treatment when T4 is low and TSH is elevated. The cutoff for elevated TSH changes with the age of the child. For children who are less than 2 weeks or 14 days, we take it as 20. For children who are beyond 14 days, that is beyond second week, it is 10. So when the TSH is below 20, more than 20 or 10 based on the age, and T4 is less than 10, or free T4 of 1.17. So we have to start treatment. All these situations indicate high probability of permanent primary congenital hypothyroidism. But we commonly see other borderline cases also. Like TSH is persistently elevated above 10, but T4 levels are always normal. And TSH is less than TSH is normal, less than 10, but T4 is low. So in both these scenarios, you start treatment. And we can reevaluate at 3 years of age, but till then, it is always better to prudent to start treatment for these children. And for all babies who are labeled as congenital hypothyroidism, there should be two tests we always do, which is thyroid ultrasound and scintigraphy. So I will just tell the approach based on these two tests. Thyroid ultrasound can be
Your
done.
screen, I think. Is it possible to mail your presentation so that I can play from here? You're able to see.
Okay. Yeah. Just a minute. The important point is don't delay levothyroxine initiation, just awaiting the test. Okay. So it can even be done within 7 days of initiation of levothyroxine. The logic behind this is the TSH takes time to normalize. The maximum time can be 4 weeks, but in most of the neonates, it takes at least a week to go below the 10 to 20 cutoff. So when we do scintigraphy, it is primarily based on the elevated levels of TSH. So it can be done within 7 days of starting levothyroxine. An abnormal test, it is important because an abnormal test confirms the diagnosis of primary congenital hypothyroidism. And in these scenarios, there is no need of off-trial therapy because we know they are permanent. So coming to the approach based on the investigations, in USG thyroid, maybe an absent gland, small gland, enlarged gland, or normal gland. So when we don't find the gland in the thyroid area, it can be athyrosis or an ectopic gland, where the gland may be situated in the sublingual region or any other location. When the gland is small and scintigraphy is showing absent or reduced uptake, it indicates thyroid hypoplasia. Similarly, when there is an enlarged gland, it indicates most likely it is a dishormonogenesis. So again, if scintigraphy shows increased uptake, it indicates endemic iodine deficiency. And if there is decreased uptake, it indicates the use of maternal antithyroid drugs. Decreased uptake only in thyroid, it is seen in antithyroid drugs. But if there is simultaneously decrease in salivary and gastric mucosa also, it indicates a defect in sodium iodide symporter gene because it is shared with all these glands. And normal uptake can be seen in dishormogenesis. We have to do a perchlorate discharge test to find the final diagnosis of dishormogenesis. And when we find a normal gland on USG thyroid and scintigraphy shows increased uptake, it is again iodine deficiency. So in iodine deficiency, USG thyroid will have a normal or enlarged gland and scintigraphy will have increased uptake. Again, no uptake is seen in sodium iodide symporter mutation, and decreased uptake can also be seen in perinatal exposure to excess iodine. Like we have used this povidone iodine for disinfection in the neonates. Then we can see this decreased uptake of the uh, radioactive iodine. Okay. In all the neonates diagnosed as congenital hypothyroidism, we should also do hearing screen because it is commonly associated. And other congenital anomalies have to be ruled out, especially cardiac. Genetic evaluation has to be considered because all dysharmonogenesis are autosomal recessive. There will be there will be 25% risk of recurrence, and even if there is a dysgenesis, in the subsequent pregnancies, the risk will be slightly higher. Although there is no Mendelian pattern of inheritance, the risk will be slightly higher. You can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So coming to the treatment, the drug of choice is levothyroxine. It is T4. We don't use T3 because although T3 is the active form, T4 is a stable form and it gets converted to T4 in the end organs. The starting dose should be higher compared to the pediatric and adult population. It should be around 10 to 15 microgram per kg per day. And it is available in various strengths 12.5, 25, and going till 400. And it is a very cheap tablet. Actually, the cost is around 2 to 4 rupees per tablet. And we have to counsel the parents how to administer the drug. It has to be given as a single daily dose. Preferably, it should be at a fixed time point so that the hormone levels will be stable and the dose will not be missed. The tablet has to be crushed. We don't have liquid formulations available in India, although it is available in the West, and some studies have shown that they are as good as the tablets. They are still not available in India. So the tablet has to be crushed and it has to be mixed in either expressed milk for infants less than 6 months and water for those more than 6 months. It has to be given separately from the feed. So you have to space the feed and administration of levothyroxine so that the absorption is better. And concurrently, we should not give iron or calcium. We commonly use iron and calcium in preterm babies and low birth weight babies, but we have to take precaution that there is no concurrent administration of levothyroxine with iron or calcium because the absorption will be severely inhibited. And monitoring is essential once we start treatment with levothyroxine. The T4 and free T4 level should be in the upper half of normal range. The normal range is around 8 to 16. So we target something around 12 to 16 of T4. And TSH should be in the adult normal range for the lab. So we are not going to see the infantile cutoffs. We just follow the adult normal range for that lab. And the normalization usually happens by 2 weeks when it is for T4. Like it happens much earlier, but in almost all the cases, it happens before 2 weeks. And TSH normalization again by 4 weeks, almost all children should have TSH normalization. If T4 is not normalizing by 2 weeks and TSH is not normalizing by 4 weeks, it indicates there is some other cause or your dose is insufficient or the administration may not be as per as desired. So this will be the cutoffs we follow for T4, 10 to 16 micrograms per deciliter. For free T4, it will be 1.4 to 2.3 and TSH less than 5. The follow-up plan, first a repeat should be done after 2 weeks of stopping levothyroxine. And when we repeat the test, the test should be only T4 and free T4. No need to do TSH at this time point, because even if the TSH is mildly elevated, we are not going to do anything. We are not going to increase the dose here. 1 month later, it should be both TSH and free T4. Then the frequency should be 2 monthly between 2 to 6 months age, 3 monthly between 6 months to 3 years of age, and thereafter 3 to 6 monthly. Again, it is dependent on how well the control is. If it is well controlled, the TSH and T4 are in normal limits, this is the follow-up plan. If any abnormality is there and you are changing the dose, again in 2 weeks you have to repeat and see. But if there are financial constraints, you may skip doing T4 or free T4. Just doing TSH is also sufficient. At 3 years, you can give a trial of therapy in those with the possibility of transient hypothyroidism. And for prognostication, people tell that a knee radiograph, absence of lower femoral epiphysis center is a poor prognostic indicator. It usually, what it indicates is presence of severe in utero hypothyroidism. Maybe the both mother and child are deficient, that can result in this thing. And again, prompt initiation of the treatment of LT4 is the most important thing. If there is any delay, there will be decreased IQs in the future. Similarly, as I have previously mentioned, T4 and TSH should normalize by 2 weeks and 1 month. If they are not normalizing, it indicates that the doses have been inadequate. So, coming to this 3-year re-evaluation, I will just tell a few points about this. So, why we chose 3 years is because brain development is almost complete. There will not be any significant impact even if you stop. Whom should we re-evaluate? Should we re-evaluate all the babies? No. Those already have proven permanent congenital hypothyroidism supported by your scintigraphy and ultrasound. There is no need to repeat. Those who are so you have to repeat for all those who are started on treatment before complete evaluation. In sick babies who are initiated, in preterm babies who are initiated, and you find a normal gland on imaging and thyroid ultrasound, but still the TSH was abnormal or T4 was low, and you started. So in those situations, again, you have to reevaluate. And it is important to note that mild cases of dysharmonogenesis, they cause transient hypothyroidism. They don't cause permanent hypothyroidism. Not in all cases, but a good number of mild dysharmonogenesis, they're actually transient. You may have to stop treatment at 3 years. So this group also has to be evaluated. So proven agenesis or ectopy, we don't reevaluate. How to reevaluate? It is either by stopping LT4 for 4 weeks and repeating thyroid tests and scan, or you can decrease the dose by 1/3 for 2 to 3 weeks, then recheck TSH. The TSH is increasing, it indicates permanent congenital hypothyroidism, then make it full dose. If there is no increase, you can further taper and stop and retest. Parental counseling, the importance I cannot overemphasize based on this. So adverse consequences of not treating has to be explained, because cretinism is a very sorry disease to see in this era. If we happen to see it, there will be severe mental retardation and growth retardation. Even if you do all the measures, once the critical phase of brain growth is over, you can never regain that lost IQ. We should also tell about the dose changes required with increasing weight and follow-up reports, and need for regular follow-up, and a pediatric endocrinologist. Whenever there is any confusion, you should always involve a pediatric endocrinologist. And genetic evaluation for those with dysharmonogenesis. I will just deal some special situations which we commonly see in NICU. One is prematurity. So how preterm babies are different from term neonates, I'm just putting the slide. The TSH surge is blunted, so the levels of TSH is also lower, and they reach term levels by around 2 weeks. In many cases, we see delayed TSH surge in preterm neonates with congenital hypothyroidism. This delayed TSH surge is a very peculiar phenomenon noted only in preterm babies. And T4 and free T4, again, because the TSH surge is blunted, their levels are also less, and they reach a nadir at 7 days. And unfortunately, this nadir comes when we see the cutoff of less than 8 or 1 for free T4 and T4, the nadir falls below this level. So this gives rise to the entity of transient hypothyroxemia of prematurity. Actually, the child is not hypothyroid. Just because the T4 is at its nadir, we tend to diagnose it as hypothyroidism based on the laboratory test. And T3 also follows the trend of T4. So this delayed rise, the risk increases with decreasing gestation age and decreasing birth weight. Like it is more common in ELBW than VLBW than LBW. So the smaller the child, the higher the incidence of delayed rise of TSH, and it can actually happen later also. Because in a LBW, it may happen at 2 to 4 weeks, but in a ELBW, it may even happen at 6 to 10 weeks. So the gestation is very important to consider when we are screening for delayed TSH rise, especially till what time you have to continue screening. And similarly, it is with the lower birth weight. So delayed TSH rise, is it significant or it is some transient abnormality? If that is the question, it is suggestive of primary congenital hypothyroidism. This is very significant. This indicates presence of a permanent primary congenital hypothyroidism. So it has to be treated promptly. So how to deal with this delayed rise? We have to do repeat testing, and some groups have suggested that lowering the TSH cutoff from 20 to 10 helps us identify children who are at increased risk for delayed TSH rise. So when to repeat the screen? 2 weeks after first screen, that is at around 3rd week of age. But the problem is even this picks up only 50% of cases. So 2 more screens may be needed at 6 and 10 weeks to pick up all the cases of delayed TSH rise. So this is a data I'm projecting from a study where 27 neonates less than 33 weeks developed as diagnosed as congenital hypothyroidism on serial testings. So if you see the x-axis, it is day of life, and y-axis is percentage of infants without congenital hypothyroidism. So at around 10 to 15 days, you see that 50% are still undiagnosed. And when you go till like 35 days, still 10 to 15% are undiagnosed. So this is an ongoing debate till when to screen, but it may be prudent screening till end of second month. Continue doing TSH till the end of second month. The other problem we see is transient hypothyroxemia of prematurity. It occurs because of, as I have already told, decreased TSH surge. Along with that, there can be loss of maternal and placental transfer of T4, which is supposed to happen at this gestation in utero, and immaturity of the hypothalamo-pituitary thyroid axis, immature thyroid hormone synthesis and metabolism, insufficient or excess iodine intake, especially this happens when we use drugs, povidone iodine, and there can be other adverse perinatal events. Again, similar to delayed TSH rise, this is inversely proportional to gestation age and birth weight. So the more premature the child, the higher the incidence of transient hypothyroxemia of prematurity. So is this problematic? There was a debate. Currently, initial non-randomized trials, they have shown increased neurodevelopmental abnormalities. But once the RCTs came out, so there is no advantage or harm with levothyroxine treatment. These are the 4 major studies conducted, RCTs conducted comparing levothyroxine supplementation in preterm neonates with THOP. In all these studies, it is found that there is no difference in Bailey scores of physical development, in psychomotor development index or motor development index. So safely, we can avoid treating transient hypothyroxemia of prematurity. So, but these neonates have to be followed closely because some of them can evolve into primary congenital hypothyroidism, and weekly to bi-weekly monitoring has to continue till the T4 levels normalized. But whenever the TSH is increasing, it is crossing 10, you have to take it as hypothyroidism, not THOP. Okay. So when you repeat the screening in these children, it should be both T4 and TSH. T4 should normalize and TSH should stay normal. And again, in sick neonates, what we call sick euthyroid syndrome, there will be lower T4 and free T4 levels and inappropriately low TSH levels. So again, this is a thing of debate whether we should treat or not treat. There is a bifurcation of opinions, but most intensivists do not treat this problem. Thyroid binding globulin deficiency, which I have told, where we find falsely low T4 but normal free T4. This is seen in around 1 in 4,000 neonates. It is X-linked recessive, and heterozygous females have intermediate levels. It is important to diagnose this condition because this helps us. This avoids us doing unnecessary tests, further tests. And transient congenital hypothyroidism, actually, most of the recent reports indicate that because we started screening for congenital hypothyroidism, most of the things that were diagnosed are actually transient, not permanent. But still, it is important to diagnose and treat them. These are the various causes which are mentioned in the slide of transient congenital hypothyroidism. And once a child is started on treatment, there can be several clues which indicate that this can be transient and this child deserves a off therapy trial. Some indicators are in utopic gland. There is a normal ultrasound and scintigraphy and relatively lower TSH. It has been noted that a TSH of less than 90, most of them end up having transient hypothyroidism, and a lower dose requirement. Various studies have shown that a dose very low, like less than 1 microgram per kg per day, 24 months, like a 10 or 12 kg child needing less than 10 to 12 mics per day, it is very sensitive in predicting transient congenital hypothyroidism. In some cases, we find compensated permanent primary congenital hypothyroidism, where TSH is elevated mildly, but T4 is normal. In neonates, it is better to treat all these children because we never know who is permanent, who is transient. And they also benefit by off therapy trial at 3 years. Iodine deficiency, again, there will be mild TSH elevation with normal T4. And most studies indicate that neonatal TSH levels actually they reflect the iodine status of the community. Mothers, they are surrogate for the iodine status of the community. Mothers with lower iodine, we find higher TSH levels. Mothers with insufficient and the milk iodine levels are extremely dependent on maternal intake and maternal sufficiency. And most of the supplements we use in neonates, they do not have adequate iodine levels. So it is important based on the endemicity, whether we are from an iron sufficient or a deficient area. Currently, with the fortification of the salt, this is not a major problem in our country, but there are still some parts where iodine deficiency is rampant. So just 2 slides on people who want to start a screening program, what factors to be considered. So as I have already mentioned, we have to consider delivery burden, discharge policy, follow-up rates, affordability of your population, and drainage area of the unit. If the delivery rates are very high, maybe it is better to use COR-TSH based approach. And similarly, if you are following a policy of early discharge, and your population is of lower socioeconomic status and educational status, and your follow-up rates are poor, or the population is coming for a very large drainage area, and it is a remote area where only basic laboratory facilities are available. In all these situations, it is better to go with COR-TSH based approach. And in other situations, you can use the postnatal TSH based approach. So take home message from my presentation, screening for CS should be universally done. TSH based approach is more suited for developing countries. And CORD or postnatal TSH is an ongoing debate. It varies from unit to unit. LT4 has to be initiated as early as possible. Good parental counseling and close follow-up is mandatory. And in some select cases, re-evaluation should be done at 3 years of age. Thank you. Open for questions.
There's a question from Sinja asking what exactly is the nomogram about TSH, T4 in term and preterm.
So we have nomograms which are available, but most of the nomograms, when they are designed, they are like for normative data. So if you ask me, if you just take the normative data for purpose of screening test, it is not sufficient. Ideally, we should find a diagnostic threshold that should be based on population studies where we find a best cutoff which picks up all the cases of primary congenital hypothyroidism. So although normative data is available, it is not very useful. So we have to stick with these cutoffs of 20 at beyond 48 hours of age and go ahead with that. In 24 to 48 hours of life, people have suggested a cutoff of 34. There are several published charts available for nomograms of TSH and T4.
Should answer Singh Juneja's question. We have a question from Srinivas asking that within specified time, that is within the first 7 days, what should be the approach to management?
Unable to do TSH screening?
To do scintigraphy in the first 7 days.
Okay, scintigraphy in first 7 days.
Management.
So scintigraphy is not mandatory for initiating treatment. Only problem is if we do scintigraphy and thyroid scan and establish a diagnosis that it is a true primary congenital hypothyroidism. So there will never be any question of off therapy or anything. In those children where we fail to do this scintigraphy, so they should go for off therapy trial at 3 years to establish the diagnosis. Once we stop the therapy and if it is permanent congenital hypothyroidism, there will be some elevation of TSH. So in that window, you can do the scintigraphy that time. But at some time point, scintigraphy has to be done. It is mandatory. Either you do at birth within 7 days or at 3 years of age. So as much as possible, we should try to get it done. But I know it is not possible everywhere. Then you have to give a off therapy trial at 3 years and do that time.
The answer is clear to him, I think. If he's unable to do, then probably we should consider doing it by 3 years of age. So there's another question by Ijaz, which he asked that cord TSH is above 40. Probably he's getting it done within 6 hours of life. So when should he do a confirmatory?
So again, I have shown in the previous slides, if it is 40, we have to call them back as early as possible and it has to be done after 48 hours. After 48 hours of age, from day 3 onwards. Ideally on day 3.
Ijaz, we'll have to call them on day 3. So Ijaz asks that why to do cardiac evaluation in congenital hypothyroidism?
So most of the published studies shows that there is a significant incidence of cardiac anomalies to the tune of up to 5 to 10%. Most of them are ASD, VSD, and PDA, but sometimes we find other anomalies also. So most guidelines, international guidelines and national guidelines, they suggest evaluation for a